The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Clarence's house, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Camilla Parker Bowles sat in her private study, her hands trembling slightly as she held the official letter that would change everything. The royal seal at the top seemed to mock her as she read the words again, each sentence feeling like a dagger to her heart. Charles had made his decision. After months of heated family discussions, private meetings, and intense pressure from various royal advisors, he had chosen to completely sever ties with her family. The letter was formal, cold, and devastating in its finality. It outlined how her children, Tom and Laura, would no longer be welcome at official royal functions. Her grandchildren would not receive the privileges that other royal stepfamilies enjoyed. Most crushing of all, her own siblings would be barred from any future royal events. The irony was not lost on her. For decades, she had fought to gain acceptance into the royal family. She had endured years of public scrutiny, media attacks, and personal sacrifices to stand beside the man she loved. Now, just when she thought she had found her place, the very institution she had worked so hard to join was systematically removing the people she cared about most. Camilla's mind drifted back to the previous evening's confrontation. Charles had called her into his private office, his face grave and his usual warmth nowhere to be found. The conversation had started civilly enough, but as the reality of his decision became clear, her composure had begun to crack. "You cannot ask me to choose between you and my family," she had pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "They have done nothing wrong except love and support me through the most difficult years of my life." Charles had remained stoic, his jaw set in determination. "The decision has been made, Camilla. The advisors are unanimous. Your family's continued presence creates complications that the crown cannot afford. There have been too many incidents, too many moments where protocol has been compromised." She knew he was referring to the recent charity gala where her son Tom had spoken too freely to the press about royal family matters. It had been innocent enough, just a proud stepson sharing his admiration for his stepfather's environmental work. But, in the rigid world of royal protocol, even the smallest misstep could be magnified into a crisis. The weeks leading up to this moment had been filled with tension. Palace staff had become increasingly formal with her family members during visits. Invitations that used to arrive regularly had stopped coming. She had noticed the subtle changes, but had hoped they were temporary, perhaps just a busy period for the royal calendar. Her sister Annabelle had been the first to voice concerns. During their weekly lunch at a quiet London restaurant, she had gently probed about the growing distance. "Camilla, darling, is everything all right? We haven't heard from the palace in weeks about the upcoming events. Usually, we would have received our invitations by now." Camilla had deflected then, making excuses about busy schedules and protocol changes. She had not wanted to worry her family unnecessarily, hoping that whatever was causing the shift would resolve itself. Now she realized she had been naive to think that her position alone would be enough to protect them. The weight of her isolation began to settle over her like a heavy blanket. In gaining a crown, was she losing everything else that mattered? The question haunted her as she sat in the opulent room that suddenly felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter Laura. "Mom, hope you're having a lovely morning. The kids are asking when they can visit Grandpa Charles again. Should I tell them this weekend?" The innocent message brought fresh tears to Camilla's eyes. How could she explain to her grandchildren that their step-grandfather, whom they adored, had decided they were no longer welcome in his world? The media attention surrounding her family had always been intense, but, lately, it had become unbearable. Photographers followed her children to work, to school events for her grandchildren, to simple grocery shopping trips. Every movement was analyzed, every interaction scrutinized for royal significance. She understood now that Charles saw this as a liability that needed to be eliminated. But, understanding his reasoning did not make the pain any less acute. Camilla had always prided herself on being strong, on weathering the storms that came with loving a future king. She had faced down angry protesters, hostile media coverage, and public ridicule with grace and determination. This felt different. This felt like betrayal from the one person who was supposed to stand by her side. As she sat in the growing silence of her study, Camilla began to realize the full scope of what was happening. This was not just about protecting the monarchy from potential embarrassment. This was about control, about ensuring that every aspect of royal life could be managed and contained. Her family, with their natural spontaneity and genuine affection, represented something that could not be easily controlled. The memories came flooding back unbidden. Tom walking her down the aisle at her wedding to Charles, his face beaming with pride and happiness. Laura helping her choose her wedding dress, the two of them laughing together like schoolgirls. Her grandchildren's delighted squeals when Charles would playfully chase them through the gardens of Highgrove. All of these precious moments now felt tainted by the knowledge that they were coming to an end. She thought about her late first husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, and how proud he would have been to see their children accepted into the royal fold. He had always supported her relationship with Charles, even after their divorce, understanding the deep love that had endured through decades of separation and reunion. What would he think of this decision to cast aside their children and grandchildren? The study door creaked open, and Charles entered without his usual knock. His face was composed, but she could see the strain around his eyes. "Camilla, we need to discuss the implementation of these changes. The staff needs clear instructions about future protocols." She looked up at him, this man she had loved for so long, and felt something fundamental shift between them. "Do we really, Charles? Or have you already made all the decisions without consulting me?" "You know this is not easy for me either," he replied, but his words felt hollow. "The responsibility of the crown requires difficult choices. The responsibility of marriage requires consultation and compromise," she shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. "When did the crown become more important than our partnership?" Charles moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she recognized as his way of avoiding difficult emotions. "The crown has always been the most important thing, Camilla. You knew that when you married me." The simple truth of his statement hit her like a physical blow. She had known it, had accepted it, had even embraced it. But somehow she had believed that their love would be enough to protect the people she cared about most. The naive romanticism of that belief now seemed almost laughable. "And what about my importance?" she asked quietly. "What about my feelings, my family, my heart?" He turned from the window, and for a moment, she saw a flash of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. But it was quickly replaced by the mask of royal duty. "Your importance to me has never been in question. But we must think of the greater good, of the stability of the institution we serve." As the conversation continued, Camilla felt herself retreating into a place she had not visited in years, the place of self-protection she had built during the darkest days of their early relationship. She began to understand that the man she had married was not just Charles, but Charles the King, and that version of him would always choose duty over personal happiness. The room fell silent as both of them contemplated the magnitude of what was happening. Outside, life in London continued its normal rhythm, unaware that inside the walls of Clarence House, a marriage and a heart were quietly breaking apart. The days following the devastating conversation blurred together in a haze of forced smiles and private anguish. Camilla found herself going through the motions of royal life, while feeling increasingly disconnected from everything around her. Official engagements continued, charity events demanded her presence, and the public saw the same composed woman they had grown to respect. But behind closed doors, she was slowly unraveling. Her personal staff began to notice the changes first. Mrs. Henderson, her longtime dresser and confidant, observed how Camilla would stare blankly into her wardrobe for long minutes, seemingly unable to decide what to wear for events that had once energized her. The woman who had always been decisive and efficient was now second-guessing every choice, every word, every gesture. "Your Majesty, shall I select the blue dress for this afternoon's hospital visit?" Mrs. Henderson would ask gently, watching as Camilla's eyes remained unfocused. "What? Oh, yes, whatever you think best," Camilla would reply, her voice lacking its usual warmth and authority. The telephone calls to her family became increasingly difficult. Each conversation was a careful dance around the elephant in the room. Her children knew something was wrong, but were respecting her obvious reluctance to discuss it. Laura had tried several times to arrange family dinners, but Camilla kept finding excuses to postpone them. "Mom, is everything all right?" Laura had asked during their last call. "You sound tired, and we haven't seen you in weeks." Camilla had forced brightness into her voice. "Oh, darling, you know how it is with royal schedules. Everything is perfectly fine. Just busy, that's all." But everything was far from fine. The weight of keeping the truth from her family was becoming unbearable. How could she tell them that the man they had welcomed as a stepfather and grandfather had decided they were no longer worthy of his world? How could she explain that their love and loyalty meant nothing in the face of royal protocol? The breaking point came during a routine charity visit to a children's hospital. Camilla was walking through the pediatric ward, speaking with young patients and their families, when a little girl named Sophie grabbed her hand. "Are you a real queen?" Sophie asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. "Yes, sweetheart, I am," Camilla replied, kneeling down to the child's level. "Do you have grandchildren like me?" Sophie continued, her eyes bright with curiosity. The simple question hit Camilla like a thunderbolt. She felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble as images of her own grandchildren flooded her mind. The children who would no longer be able to visit royal residences, who would no longer experience the magic of Christmas at Sandringham, who were being erased from her royal life as if they had never existed. Yes, I do," she managed to whisper, her voice catching slightly. "Do they visit you in your palace?" Sophie asked, oblivious to the emotional storm she was unleashing. Camilla felt her hands begin to shake. The walls of the hospital corridor seemed to close in around her. The sounds of medical equipment, distant conversations, and children's laughter created a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm her senses. She could feel the eyes of her security detail, the hospital staff, and the accompanying media representatives watching her every move. They used to," she said, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Henderson, ever vigilant, immediately stepped forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should move on to the next ward." But the damage was done. Camilla could feel the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled an approaching panic attack. She had experienced them occasionally during the worst periods of media scrutiny in her earlier relationship with Charles, but they had been rare occurrences in recent years. Now, the overwhelming sense of loss and betrayal was manifesting in ways she could no longer control. She excused herself as gracefully as possible, citing a brief feeling of fatigue, and was quickly escorted to a private room within the hospital. Once alone with Mrs. Henderson and her protection officer, the facade finally cracked completely. "I can't do this anymore," she gasped, struggling to breathe properly. "I can't keep pretending that everything is normal when my whole world is falling apart." Mrs. Henderson, who had been with the royal family for over 2 decades, had seen many private moments of vulnerability, but this was different. This was a woman being torn apart from the inside, and there seemed to be no comfort that could be offered. The drive back to Clarence House was conducted in silence. Camilla stared out the window at the London streets, watching ordinary families going about their daily lives. A mother pushing a stroller, grandparents walking hand in hand with young children, families laughing together outside cafes, all reminders of what she was losing. That evening, she finally worked up the courage to call her son Tom. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and warm. "Mom, how lovely to hear from you. I was just telling Alice about your last visit. She's been asking when Granny Camilla is coming to see her new paintings." The mention of her granddaughter's artwork was the final straw. Camilla felt her carefully controlled emotions explode outward like a dam bursting. "Oh, Tom," she sobbed into the phone, all pretense abandoned. "I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry." "Mom, what's wrong? What are you sorry for?" Tom's voice immediately shifted to concern. Through her tears, the whole story came tumbling out. The palace meetings, the formal letters, Charles's ultimatum, the gradual separation that had been orchestrated without her family's knowledge. Tom listened in stunned silence as his mother described the systematic removal of her family from royal life. "But why?" he finally asked, his voice filled with hurt and confusion. "What have we done wrong? We've always been respectful, always followed protocol." "Nothing," Camilla whispered. "You've done nothing wrong. This is about protecting the crown from any possible complications. You and Laura and the grandchildren, you're all seen as potential liabilities." "Potential liabilities?" Tom's voice rose with anger. "We're your family. We love you. How can loving you be a liability?" It was a question Camilla had been asking herself repeatedly, and she had no satisfactory answer. How had the very people who had supported her through her darkest hours become obstacles to be removed? How had their genuine affection and loyalty become something to be feared and controlled? The conversation with Tom lasted for over an hour, both of them crying, both trying to understand how their family had become collateral damage in the machinery of monarchy. When she finally hung up, Camilla felt both devastated and strangely relieved. The secret was out, the pretense was over, but the reality of her situation was now undeniably clear. She called Laura next, and then her sister Annabelle. Each conversation was a fresh wound, each expression of hurt and bewilderment from her family members another confirmation of the magnitude of what was being lost. By the end of the evening, she was emotionally drained, but no longer carrying the burden of secrecy alone. Charles found her in the drawing room near midnight, sitting in the dark with only the light from the fireplace illuminating her tear-stained face. He had been attending a state dinner and was still wearing his formal evening wear, the medals and decorations catching the firelight. "I heard you had a difficult day," he said carefully, maintaining his distance. "I told them," she said simply, not looking up at him. "I told my family what you've decided." "Camilla, we discussed." "No," she interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You decided. You informed me. There was no discussion, no consultation, no consideration for my feelings or my family's well-being." Charles moved closer, but still did not sit down. "You know I take no pleasure in this decision." "Do I?" she asked, finally, looking up at him. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems quite easy for you to discard the people who have loved and supported us both." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, highlighting the growing chasm between them. Here was a couple who had fought for decades to be together, who had weathered public scandals and personal tragedies, who had finally found their place together on the throne. And yet, the very forces that had tried to keep them apart were now succeeding in driving them apart from within. "The crown requires sacrifices," Charles said finally, the familiar refrain sounding increasingly hollow. "And when do the sacrifices stop?" Camilla asked. "When there's nothing left of me that isn't royal? When every personal relationship has been evaluated and found wanting? When love itself becomes a liability?" As she sat in the flickering firelight, Camilla began to understand that she was facing a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could continue to accept the gradual erosion of everything that had made her who she was, or she could find a way to fight back against the forces that were systematically destroying her heart. The weeks that followed Camilla's emotional breakdown brought an unexpected clarity to her situation, though not the kind she had hoped for. As news of the family separation began to spread through royal circles, she discovered just how isolated she had become within the very institution she had worked so hard to serve. Lady Susan Hussey, one of the Queen Mother's former ladies-in-waiting and a longtime fixture in royal circles, had been among the first to reach out. Their meeting took place in a discreet corner of Fortnum and Mason, away from the usual haunts where royal watchers might spot them. "My dear Camilla," Lady Susan had said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of royal service, "I've heard whispers about the situation with your family. I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with the direction things are taking." It was the first indication Camilla had received that there might be support for her position within the establishment. But, as Lady Susan continued, the reality became more complex. There are those who believe that the monarchy's strength comes from its ability to evolve and embrace the families that join it through marriage. But there are others, particularly among the newer advisors, who see any deviation from traditional protocol as a threat to be eliminated. "And which camp does Charles belong to?" Camilla had asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Lady Susan's hesitation spoke volumes. "His Majesty is conflicted. He loves you deeply, but he has been convinced that protecting the crown requires difficult choices. The pressure on him has been immense since the coronation." This conversation planted a seed of understanding in Camilla's mind about the forces at work behind Charles's decision. She began to see that her husband might not be the primary architect of her family's exclusion, but rather another victim of the relentless machinery of royal protocol and political calculation. Her personal investigation into the matter began subtly. She started paying closer attention to the advisors who surrounded Charles, noting who had his ear during private meetings and whose recommendations seemed to carry the most weight. What she discovered both surprised and deeply disturbed her. Sir Malcolm Bridges, the newly appointed private secretary to the king, had been a driving force behind many of the recent changes in royal protocol. A career civil servant with a reputation for efficiency and control, he had been brought in specifically to modernize the monarchy's operations. But his version of modernization seemed to involve eliminating anything that could not be easily managed or controlled. During a state dinner for visiting dignitaries, Camilla had overheard Sir Malcolm speaking with another advisor about loose ends and potential complications that needed to be tidied up before the next round of official visits. The clinical language used to describe her family members made her blood run cold. She began to understand that this was not simply about her family's behavior or any real protocol violations. This was about a systematic restructuring of how the royal family operated, with Sir Malcolm and his allies working to create a more tightly controlled, corporate-style monarchy. Personal relationships that could not be easily managed were being eliminated in favor of carefully curated public appearances and controlled messaging. The realization that her family had become pawns in a larger political game filled Camilla with a rage she had not felt since the darkest days of media persecution in the 1990s. But this time, the attack was coming from within the institution she had pledged to serve. Her first attempt to fight back was direct, but unsuccessful. She requested a private meeting with Sir Malcolm, hoping to appeal to his sense of fairness and reason. The meeting took place in his austere office at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by filing cabinets and organizational charts that seemed to reduce the human drama of royal life to mere data points. "Sir Malcolm," she began, keeping her voice level and professional, "I wanted to discuss the recent changes in protocol regarding my family's participation in royal events." "Ah, yes, Your Majesty," he replied, consulting a thick folder that apparently contained detailed assessments of every royal family member and their potential security risks. "I trust you understand that these decisions were not made lightly. We've conducted thorough reviews of all potential vulnerabilities." "Vulnerabilities?" Camilla repeated, struggling to maintain her composure. "These are my children and grandchildren we're discussing, not security threats." Sir Malcolm's expression remained unchanged, as if he were discussing budget allocations rather than human relationships. "With respect, Your Majesty, in our current environment, any individual with access to royal circles who cannot be fully controlled represents a potential vulnerability. Your family members, while I'm sure well-intentioned, have shown a tendency toward spontaneous behavior that could create complications." "Spontaneous behavior," Camilla said slowly. "Like loving their family? Like showing genuine affection? Like being authentic human beings? Like speaking to the press without proper briefings," Sir Malcolm countered smoothly. "Like sharing personal anecdotes about royal family members in social settings. Like posting photographs on social media platforms without security clearance." Each example he cited was technically accurate, but stripped of all context and human warmth. Yes, Tom had spoken enthusiastically about Charles's environmental work, but it had been out of genuine admiration. Yes, Laura had shared family photos, but they had been innocent glimpses of holiday celebrations. Yes, the grandchildren had been spontaneous during public events, but their natural behavior had actually humanized the royal family in ways that carefully staged photo opportunities could never achieve. "You're turning my family into statistics," Camilla said, her voice rising despite her attempts to remain calm. "You're reducing love and loyalty to risk assessments and protocol violations." "I'm protecting the institution that you have sworn to serve," Sir Malcolm replied coolly. "Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." The meeting ended with no resolution, but Camilla left with a clearer understanding of what she was up against. This was not just about royal protocol. This was about a fundamental philosophy of control that saw human emotion and spontaneous affection as threats to be neutralized. Her next approach was more strategic. She began building a network of allies within the royal household, reaching out to long-serving staff members who remembered when the monarchy had been less rigid and more human. Many of them expressed private concerns about the direction of recent changes. Margaret Thornton, who had served as a dresser to several royal women over the past 30 years, was particularly vocal in her support. "It's like they're trying to turn the royal family into robots," she confided during one of their conversations. "Everything has to be scripted, controlled, predictable. There's no room left for genuine moments or real relationships." These conversations revealed that Camilla's situation was part of a broader transformation affecting many aspects of royal life. Longtime traditions were being eliminated if they were deemed inefficient. Staff members who had served faithfully for decades were being reassigned or forced into early retirement if they were seen as too attached to old ways of doing things. The monarchy was being run like a corporation, with efficiency and control taking precedence over tradition and human connection. But perhaps the most devastating discovery came through an inadvertent comment from one of Charles's newer equerries. During a garden party at Buckingham Palace, the young man had approached Camilla with what he clearly thought was a compliment. "Your Majesty, I just wanted to say how impressed everyone is with how smoothly the transition regarding your family has been handled." Sir Malcolm said the whole operation was completed without a single media leak or public relations issue. The casual reference to the operation hit Camilla like a physical blow. Her family's exclusion had not been an unfortunate necessity. It had been a carefully planned campaign with objectives, timelines, and success metrics. The people she loved most had been systematically removed from her life as part of an operation. That night, she confronted Charles with this new information, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. An operation, Charles? The destruction of my family relationships was an operation? Was my heartbreak part of your success metrics? Charles looked genuinely shocked by the terminology, suggesting that even he had not been fully aware of how coldly calculated the process had been. Camilla, that's not how I saw it. That's not what this was supposed to be. Then, what was it supposed to be, she demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you allowed a group of bureaucrats to dismantle everything I cared about while you focused on other priorities. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest they had shared in months. Charles admitted that he had been overwhelmed by the pressures of kingship and had delegated many decisions to advisors he trusted to handle the details. He had not realized how systematic and calculating the approach to her family had become. I never wanted it to be this cold, he said, his voice heavy with what seemed like genuine regret. I thought it would be a gradual adjustment, a natural evolution. I didn't realize they were treating it like a military campaign. But even this admission provided little comfort to Camilla. Whether the cruelty had been intentional or the result of bureaucratic efficiency, the damage was the same. Her family had been hurt, her relationships had been severed, and her trust had been betrayed. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom in Clarence House, Camilla began to formulate a plan. If the forces arrayed against her family were organized and systematic, then her response would need to be equally strategic. She could not simply rely on emotional appeals or hope that Charles would suddenly find the strength to override his advisors. She would need to fight back with the same level of organization and determination that had been used against her. The question was whether she still had enough fight left in her to wage such a battle, and whether the cost of winning would be worth the relationships that might be destroyed in the process. The transformation of Camilla from a grieving stepmother into a strategic opponent of the royal bureaucracy began with a single phone call that would change everything. 3 weeks after her confrontation with Charles about the operation to exclude her family, she received an unexpected message that would provide her with the ammunition she needed to fight back. The call came from Jonathan Hartwell, a respected journalist who had covered the royal family for over 20 years. Unlike many in his profession, he had always treated Camilla fairly, even during the most difficult periods of public scrutiny. His voice was carefully controlled as he explained why he was reaching out. Your Majesty, I've been investigating some unusual patterns in recent royal protocol changes, and I've stumbled across some information that I believe you should be aware of before I decide whether to publish anything. They arranged to meet at a private location away from royal residences and potential surveillance. The venue was a small tea room in an unremarkable suburb of London, the kind of place where even the Queen Consort could blend into the background of ordinary life. What Jonathan revealed during their clandestine meeting was explosive in its implications. Through his network of sources within the civil service and royal household, he had uncovered evidence that the systematic changes to royal protocol were part of a broader agenda to reshape the monarchy into something more akin to a modern corporate entity. The document I've obtained outlines a 5-year plan, Jonathan explained, sliding a folder across the table. It's called Project Renaissance, and it aims to eliminate what they term inefficiencies and vulnerabilities within the royal family structure. Camilla opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopied pages of what appeared to be a comprehensive strategic plan, complete with timelines, objectives, and assessment criteria. Her family's exclusion was listed under Phase 2, streamlining extended family connections. But what truly shocked her was Phase 3, rationalization of royal spouse dependencies. According to the document, her own role was eventually to be refined to eliminate her involvement in areas deemed outside her core competencies. The plan suggested that future queen consorts should focus exclusively on predetermined charitable interests while avoiding any activities that might complicate messaging or create protocol conflicts. They're not just targeting my family, Camilla whispered, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. They're planning to turn me into a ceremonial figurehead with no real influence or independence. Jonathan nodded grimly. And it gets worse. Phase 4 addresses what they call succession optimization. The document suggests implementing new protocols that would severely limit the influence of future spouses and extended family members, essentially preventing anyone from having the kind of personal relationships with the monarch that might interfere with official decision-making. The implications were staggering. This was not just about Camilla's family or even her own position. This was about fundamentally altering the nature of the monarchy, removing the human elements that had traditionally made the royal family relatable and replacing them with a cold, efficient, corporate-style operation. Who's behind this? Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew. The document originates from Sir Malcolm Bridges' office, but the signatures and approval stamps suggest involvement from the cabinet secretary and several other senior civil servants. This isn't just a royal household initiative. It appears to have government backing at the highest levels. Camilla felt a chill run through her as she realized the full extent of the forces arrayed against her family and her marriage. This was not simply a matter of palace intrigue or administrative efficiency. This was a coordinated effort to fundamentally reshape the monarchy according to a vision that had no room for the messy, unpredictable, beautiful reality of human relationships. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked Jonathan. "Because I believe the public has a right to know what's being done in their name," he replied. "But more than that, because I've watched you fight for your place in this family for decades, and I don't think you should have to watch it all be taken away without having the chance to respond." That evening, Camilla made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. She contacted Lady Susan Hussey and arranged for a private gathering of what she began to think of as the resistance, longtime royal household staff, former advisors, and aristocratic supporters who were concerned about the direction of recent changes. The meeting took place at the London home of the Earl of Pembroke, a longtime friend of the royal family who had expressed private concerns about the increasing corporatization of royal life. Around his drawing room table sat a group of individuals who collectively represented centuries of experience in serving and supporting the British monarchy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Camilla began, her voice steadier than she had felt in months. "I've called you together because I believe we are witnessing an attack on the fundamental nature of what the royal family represents to the British people." She laid out everything she had learned about Project Renaissance, sharing photocopies of the documents Jonathan had provided. The reaction around the table was one of shock and anger. These were people who had devoted their lives to preserving royal traditions and supporting the monarchy through various challenges and changes. "This is an abomination," declared retired General Sir David Morrison, who had served as a senior equerry to 3 monarchs. "They're trying to turn centuries of tradition into a business plan." "What's particularly concerning," added Lady Susan, "is that many of these changes are being implemented without the king's full understanding of their broader implications. Charles is being fed selected information and strategic summaries while the real agenda remains hidden." The group spent the next several hours developing a strategy to counter Project Renaissance. Their plan was multifaceted, involving careful documentation of the changes being implemented, cultivation of media contacts who could help expose the truth, and, most importantly, education of Charles himself about what was being done in his name. Camilla volunteered to take on the most dangerous part of the mission, directly confronting the architects of Project Renaissance while gathering additional evidence of their activities. It was a risky strategy that could backfire spectacularly if not handled carefully, but the group agreed that dramatic action was necessary to prevent further damage. Her first major confrontation came during a routine palace meeting about upcoming royal engagements. Sir Malcolm Bridges was present, along with several other senior advisors, when Camilla decided to spring her trap. "Sir Malcolm," she said casually, "I've been reviewing some documentation about efficiency improvements in royal protocol. Very impressive work. I particularly found the section on succession optimization to be enlightening." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sir Malcolm's face went pale, and the other advisors exchanged nervous glances. They clearly had not expected her to have access to the Project Renaissance documents. "Your Majesty," Sir Malcolm stammered, "I'm not sure what documentation you're referring to." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm referring to," Camilla replied smoothly. "The 5-year plan to systematically eliminate the human elements of royal life in favor of a more efficient corporate model. Quite ambitious in scope." The meeting that followed was unlike anything in Camilla's experience of royal protocols. Faced with evidence of their conspiracy, the advisors shifted between denial, justification, and damage control. Sir Malcolm attempted to frame Project Renaissance as a necessary modernization effort designed to protect the monarchy from contemporary challenges. "Your Majesty must understand that the monarchy faces unprecedented scrutiny in the modern era," he argued. "Every relationship, every interaction, every public appearance is analyzed and criticized. We need systems in place to minimize potential controversies. And You decided that the best way to minimize controversies was to eliminate authentic relationships and genuine emotions. Camilla countered, to turn the royal family into a collection of performing automatons. We decided that the best way to serve the crown was to ensure predictable, manageable outcomes, Sir Malcolm replied, his composure returning as he fell back on bureaucratic language. It was a revealing exchange that confirmed everything Camilla had suspected about the motivations behind her family's exclusion. This was not about protecting the monarchy. It was about controlling it, reducing it to a manageable set of variables that could be manipulated to serve various political and administrative agendas. The confrontation ended with Sir Malcolm requesting a private audience with the king to discuss recent security concerns regarding information access. Camilla knew that she had fired the first shot in what would likely become a prolonged battle for the soul of the royal family. That evening, she sat in her study preparing for the fight ahead. She had evidence of the conspiracy, allies willing to support her, and a clear understanding of what was at stake. But she also knew that victory was far from guaranteed. The forces she was challenging had significant resources, political backing, and the advantage of operating within established systems of authority. More troubling still was the question of how this battle would affect her marriage to Charles. She was essentially accusing his most trusted advisors of manipulating him and betraying the values they claimed to serve. Even if she was successful in exposing Project Renaissance, the process might irreparably damage her relationship with the man she had fought so long to marry. But as she thought about her grandchildren asking when they could visit Grandpa Charles again, about her son Tom's hurt confusion at his sudden exclusion, about her daughter Laura's attempts to understand what had gone wrong, Camilla knew she had no choice. Some battles were too important to avoid, regardless of the personal cost. The war for her family, her marriage, and the future of the monarchy was about to begin in earnest. The final confrontation came on a rainy Thursday morning in November, exactly 6 months after Camilla had first received the letter that changed everything. Charles had requested her presence in his private study at Buckingham Palace, and she knew from his formal tone that this meeting would determine the future of their marriage and her family. Sir Malcolm Bridges was waiting when she arrived, along with 2 other senior advisors she recognized as key architects of Project Renaissance. Their presence confirmed what she had suspected. This was not going to be a private conversation between husband and wife, but a formal hearing where her loyalty to the crown would be questioned and judged. Camilla, Charles began, his voice strained with exhaustion and stress. We need to address some serious concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your recent activities. She took her seat across from him, noting how the formal arrangement of the room created a barrier between them. This was not the Charles who had loved her for decades, but King Charles III conducting official business. The transformation was heartbreaking, but not surprising. I assume you're referring to my efforts to understand why my family was systematically excluded from our lives without consultation or explanation, she replied calmly. Sir Malcolm cleared his throat and consulted his ever-present files. Your Majesty, we've received reports that you've been conducting unauthorized meetings with former royal household staff, sharing classified documents with outside parties, and generally undermining established security protocols. I've been trying to understand why the people I love were branded as security threats and discarded like unwanted furniture, Camilla shot back. If seeking answers to legitimate questions constitutes undermining security, then perhaps your definition of security is the problem. Charles raised his hand for silence, but Camilla could see the conflict in his eyes. During their private conversations over the past weeks, she had shared everything she had learned about Project Renaissance, and she knew that some of what she had revealed had shocked and disturbed him. The question before us today, Charles said carefully, is whether your recent actions represent a temporary emotional response to difficult but necessary changes, or whether they indicate a fundamental incompatibility with your role as queen consort. The ultimatum was clear, and Camilla felt her heart break a little more as she realized that even now, even faced with evidence of manipulation and conspiracy, Charles was more concerned with preserving institutional stability than protecting their personal relationship. Let me ask you a question in return, she said, leaning forward in her chair. When you married me, did you marry Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman who had loved you for decades and stood by you through every scandal and crisis? Or did you marry a position, a role, a carefully managed public relations asset? The silence that followed was deafening. Charles looked uncomfortable, while Sir Malcolm and his colleagues maintained their professional masks. But the question hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. Because if you married the woman, Camilla continued, then you married someone whose family was part of her identity, whose relationships were part of her strength, whose authenticity was part of her value. But if you married the position, then I suppose none of that matters as long as I smile correctly at state dinners and never express opinions that might complicate your agenda. Charles stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in the gesture she now recognized as his way of avoiding difficult emotions. Camilla, you know how much I love you. This isn't about our personal relationship, isn't it? She challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like it's entirely about our personal relationship. You've allowed these people to convince you that my love for my family makes me unreliable, that my authentic emotions make me a security risk, that my refusal to be a puppet makes me unsuitable for my role. Sir Malcolm attempted to regain control of the conversation. Your Majesty, with all due respect, the requirements of royal service sometimes conflict with personal preferences. The crown must take precedence over individual desires. The crown, Camilla repeated, her voice rising with anger she could no longer contain. You keep talking about the crown as if it's some mystical entity that exists separate from the human beings who wear it. But the crown is nothing without the people it represents and the relationships that give it meaning. She stood up, facing the room with a dignity and authority that surprised even herself. You've spent months trying to reduce my family to risk assessments and protocol violations, but you've forgotten something crucial. The British people don't love the royal family because of our efficiency ratings or our compliance with administrative procedures. They love us because we represent the possibility that power and responsibility can coexist with genuine human emotion and authentic relationships. The speech that followed was one that Camilla had been composing in her head for weeks, a summation of everything she had learned about the forces trying to reshape the monarchy and her own role within it. You want to turn us into performing dolls, carefully programmed to never say anything unexpected, never feel anything too deeply, never form relationships that might complicate your neat organizational charts. But that's not what monarchy is supposed to be about. She turned directly to Charles, ignoring the advisors entirely. Your mother understood this. She knew that the strength of the royal family came from its ability to remain human while carrying extraordinary responsibilities. She made mistakes, she faced crises, she dealt with family complications, but she never allowed bureaucrats to convince her that efficiency was more important than authenticity. Charles turned from the window, and, for the first time in months, she saw her husband rather than the king looking back at her. What are you asking of me, Camilla? I'm asking you to choose, she said simply. Choose between the woman you married and the corporate consultants who think they can reduce human love to spreadsheet data. Choose between the family you gained through marriage and the administrative efficiency that requires you to discard anything that can't be easily controlled. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Sir Malcolm and his colleagues looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized that their carefully orchestrated intervention was not proceeding according to plan. And if I choose you, Charles asked quietly, what happens to my responsibilities as king? What happens to the stability and security that these protocols are designed to ensure? Then, we find a different way, Camilla replied. We find a way to honor your responsibilities without sacrificing your humanity. We protect the crown by making it stronger through authentic relationships rather than weaker through artificial controls. It was in that moment that Charles made a decision that would redefine his reign and their marriage. He walked over to his desk, picked up a folder that Sir Malcolm had prepared for the meeting, and handed it to Camilla. This contains a detailed proposal for your future role as queen consort, he said. According to Sir Malcolm's recommendations, you would focus exclusively on a small number of predetermined charitable causes, avoid all public statements that have not been pre-approved, and limit your family interactions to formal occasions that can be properly managed. Camilla opened the folder and quickly scanned the contents. It was exactly what she had expected, a job description for a royal robot, designed to eliminate spontaneity, emotion, and authentic human connection from her public role. And what do you think of this proposal? She asked. Charles was quiet for a long moment, looking around the room at the advisors who had spent months convincing him that control and efficiency were more important than love and loyalty. When he finally spoke, his voice was strong and clear. I think, he said, that these gentlemen have forgotten that they serve the crown, not the other way around. The transformation in the room was immediate and dramatic. Sir Malcolm's face went pale as he realized that his carefully orchestrated campaign was collapsing. Your Majesty, if I may, the security and stability considerations are important, Charles interrupted, but they are not more important than the fundamental values that the monarchy is supposed to represent. We are not a corporation, gentlemen. We are a family that serves as a symbol of continuity, tradition, and, yes, human relationships in all their complicated, messy, beautiful reality. The meeting that followed involved a complete restructuring of royal protocols and a thorough review of Project Renaissance. Charles directed that all initiatives aimed at streamlining royal family relationships be suspended pending a comprehensive evaluation of their impact on both institutional effectiveness and human welfare. Most importantly for Camilla, he issued a clear directive that her family members were to be restored to their previous positions in royal life, with their participation in official events to be determined by personal relationships and family occasions rather than administrative assessments of their security value. 6 months later, Camilla sat in the same study where her nightmare had begun, but this time she was not alone. Tom and Laura were there with their children, helping Charles plan a surprise birthday party for their stepmother. The scene was chaotic, loving, and completely unscripted, everything that the architects of Project Renaissance had tried to eliminate. Granny Camilla, her youngest granddaughter, announced, "Grandpa Charles says we can have the party in the big ballroom with the sparkly ceiling." "Did he now?" Camilla laughed, catching Charles's eye across the room. "And did Grandpa Charles ask permission from the Royal Protocol Office?" "Aye," Charles replied with a grin that she had not seen in far too long, "and the king. I think I can authorize a birthday party for my wife without consulting a committee." It was a small moment, an ordinary family scene playing out in an extraordinary setting. But, for Camilla, it represented something profound, the victory of love over efficiency, of humanity over bureaucracy, of authentic relationships over artificial controls. The battle had been won, but, more than that, they had rediscovered what the crown was supposed to represent. Not the perfect execution of predetermined roles, but the ongoing negotiation between duty and love, between responsibility and authenticity, between serving the public and remaining true to the relationships that gave their service meaning. As she watched her family plan her birthday celebration with the enthusiasm and chaos that only genuine love can create, Camilla understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them. In the end, the crown was strongest when it was worn by people who remained fully, completely, beautifully human.